Hi, I'd like to welcome you to the second video in our online training series for CAC board members. This one is really specifically geared toward board members to give you some basic information about what it means to be an effective board member for your Child Advocacy Center. My name is Emily Chittenden-Laird, and I am the director of the West Virginia Child Advocacy Network. And I'd like to first and foremost thank you for your service, because it really is board members that make Child Advocacy Centers successful in their local communities. So you may be on one of three types of boards. The first would be a governance board, which is the legal entity providing oversight for the 501c3. And a lot of what we're talking about in this is geared toward governance boards, but you'll also see things that have resonance for the two other types of boards. The second type of board is an advisory board. And we frequently see advisory boards with our CACs that are umbrellaed under a larger 501c3, so that they are a program, but they are not the whole organization. And it's really helpful in those CACs to have an advisory board, so there is a set of community members that are being ambassadors for the Child Advocacy Center, getting out there, talking about what the CAC does in the local community, and really helping do some fund development. The advisory board does not have governance power over the CAC, but it does provide important guidance to the organization. So there is a really critical role to play for advisory boards. The third type of board is if you have an administrative board. This would be whenever you are in a startup phase for your CAC, and you may not yet have your 501c3, but this is where a lot of the board members are doing the work of the organization prior to staff. So as a board member of an administrative board, you may be writing a grant for the Child Advocacy Center, or you may be looking to find space for the Child Advocacy Center, some of those more traditionally staff-based roles. But for all these types of boards, there are elements of this presentation that will be meaningful to you. When we think about the mandate for boards, there are really 5 different things. The first thing is to establish and maintain focus on the mission of the organization. Do you know what the mission statement of your Child Advocacy Center is? It's a really critical question for board members to ask, because the mission statement is really the benchmark against which you should hold all decisions that you make as a board. Is this aligned with our mission, or are we off in left field doing something that we don't need to be doing? It's really good to revisit your mission statement as a board as you evolve and grow, because sometimes what we see is that our mission statement was too narrow. So for some of our early Child Advocacy Centers, their mission statement was really geared towards sexual abuse. And then they said, no, we really want to be serving the needs of all child abuse victims in our community. And so they broadened their mission. For others, they may find it's too general, and they really need to narrow it so that they are achieving the goals that they intend to achieve as a Child Advocacy Center. But it's very important as a board member to understand the mission. The second mandate is to share and develop and communicate the vision of your organization. Do you know where your organization is headed? If you are successful, how will you know that you're successful? Does it mean that every child has access to trauma-focused therapy in your community? Does it mean that child abuse is eradicated in your community? But really having a part in saying, where is it that we're headed together, is critical for boards. The third thing is to protect and provide for organizational and financial security. Of course, this is a really, really important role for board members to play. Child Advocacy Centers have a significant need to have funding for the programs that they do. You can't make services happen without the funding. And so this is a really critical role for board members to play. Are you helping identify new funding sources in the community? Are you giving yourself? And we'll get into that a little bit later, but this is really tied to the next one, which is to ensure programmatic and organizational stability. Without financial security, you can't have organizational stability. So those two go hand in hand. But one thing that you might look at with organizational stability is, do you have a lot of staff turnover? If you have a lot of staff turnover, why is that? Is it because you don't pay enough? Is it because you don't provide benefits? And these are the types of questions that it's really important for a board to be asking, because people are your most valuable resources. And ensuring that service levels are maintained and provided so that kids get the services they need at the local CAC really requires the board to be minding the stability of the organization. And the fifth and final mandate is to direct the course for the future. This really relates to having a strategic plan in place, and that's something that we're going to get into a little bit. So there are 10 basic roles and responsibilities for governance boards. The first one is to determine, support, and protect the mission and purpose of the organization. We talked a little bit about understanding what is your mission, but are you able to communicate that when you're out in the community? You really need to measure every opportunity and threat that you face as a board against the mission of the organization. And again, we're talking about this being the touchstone, the cornerstone really, against which you consider all things for your organization. And so maybe you have an opportunity to do something great in your community. Maybe someone's come to you and said, hey, what about this mentoring grant? That would be really great. We have it, it's up for someone to receive, and we'd like for the CAC to consider it. Well, you need to go back and look at your mission and say, does this fit in our mission, or are we just chasing money? It's really important that you stay focused and clear so that you can proceed as an organization to achieve the mission that you're trying to achieve. And again, we need to periodically review the mission statement and then revise that mission statement as needed. The second mandate and major role and responsibility for a board is to organize so that the board operates effectively. I know that I've been on a number of work groups and places where I just feel like what we're doing is getting us nowhere. And organization is so central to effective operation that it's an important, imperative thing for boards to look at. First and foremost, you need to have a working knowledge and understanding of your organization's bylaws. And yes, I know it's a long, boring document, but it's really important that you read it so you understand, how does your organization make decisions? How are you supposed to be operating? And the second thing is to develop a strong and effective committee structure with appropriate leadership. Now, this is such an important thing for boards, and effective boards that I've been on have effective committee structures, and ineffective boards I've been on do not have effective committee structures. So that may look different for every CAC, but you need to take a look at your strategic plan and say, what are the key central issues that we need to organize around, and make sure, again, that there's appropriate leadership for those, somebody who is able to really facilitate that and move that committee forward. The work of the board should much of the time be done in committees rather than in board meetings. Board meetings are for committees to come, report, make recommendations, have those discussions with the entire board, but the real work and the real effort should be done in the committees. You need to establish a workable meeting schedule and format. If you're having attendance issues, maybe it's that you're meeting at the wrong time of the week, and maybe you need to try to switch your timing of your meeting. So make sure that you're meeting frequently enough, at least quarterly is imperative. So you need to establish a schedule and keep that moving forward. You also need to ensure that board leadership is identified intentionally and strategically. I've been at meetings, and I'm sure you have too, where you recommend Ben because he's not in the room, and so he gets nominated to be the best board president. Well, it's a terrible way to identify your leadership for your organization. Board leadership really needs to be individuals who understand what they're taking on and who are willing and able to fulfill those roles. I cannot stress enough how important good, solid board leadership is. So don't nominate Ben when he's out of the room. Nominate Ben if he knows what you're doing and has agreed to it and is the right person to fulfill that. And that's true for the presidency or chairmanship of your board, and it's true for the treasurer of your board, but it's also really true for your committee chairs. And so all the different leadership roles need to be have thoughtful, careful, strategic approach. The third mandate and role and responsibility for boards is to approve and monitor programs and services. Again, we were talking about, what happens if you get the opportunity to apply for this grant that might be a great thing to do in the community, but it's not consistent with your mission. That's the board's role, to bring it back and say, yes, this is consistent with our mission and we should move forward with it, or no, this is not consistent with our mission. Understanding and monitoring the programs is the role of the board, not managing. And this is one place where we see conflict come into play. If we have board members who think it's their job to manage a program, that's really the staff's job to execute and carry out the day-to-day things that the organization does. And yet, the board does need to be aware with an overarching sense of what's happening in the programs and make sure that, again, they're on target and consistent with the mission of the organization. And then to evaluate the effectiveness of the programs and services using relative metrics. You shouldn't be relying on the executive director telling you, yeah, we're doing a great job with interviews. Okay, well, what are our interview numbers? How does that compare to other CACs in the state? Do we know that we're doing a good job of serving the kids in this community? One relevant metric that your Child Advocacy Center should be using is an annual statistical report. They are reporting statistics on an every 6-month basis, both to West Virginia CAN and to the National Children's Alliance, so I know they exist. But the board should be seeing that and using those statistics to raise critical questions. For example, we've had 100 kids receive forensic interviews, but only 10 of those kids have engaged in therapy. Why is that? That is a role for the board to play, to ask those types of questions. Another relevant measurement would be the outcome measurement system, and all of our accredited child advocacy centers in West Virginia are using this. And if you're a new developing center, you may not yet be using this, but you need to be moving toward using it, which measures 2 key indicators. One is, are clients, i.e. the children and families, satisfied with the services they're receiving, and what is their experience at the CAC? And the second key indicator that it measures is, how is the team perceiving the Child Advocacy Center model and effectiveness in your community? And so there are many more details and subsets of those key relevant questions that you're answering through the outcome measurement system, but the board should be seeing that again on an every 6-month or every year basis. The fourth main role and responsibility is to ensure resources, and yes, this means raise money. I know that there are many people who say, oh, I want to be on a board, but I'm not comfortable raising money. Well, everyone can have a role to play in raising money for the CAC. You should, A, be playing a role in developing an annual fund development plan and related strategies. And so maybe this is a place where you can really play a role in your Child Advocacy Center. We need to raise $50,000 this year. How are we going to do that? Is it through some fundraising events? Are we going to be doing a capital campaign? What is our plan to get to that $50,000 mark? And where do I see that I can fit into that? Every board member should make a personal contribution annually, and I always recommend that that be an expectation of boards. It doesn't matter if it's $5 or $5,000. Every board member needs to make a contribution that is of significance to them. Now, as your board develops, you may get to a place where you're able to say, to serve on this board, you need to either make a personal contribution or bring into the organization $1,000 each or $2,000 each. And many boards aren't at that place, but it's okay. We just need to know that you have some skin in the game by making a contribution, because it shows to the community that your board really believes in what you're doing at the Child Advocacy Center. Foundations often ask that question. What % of board members give to your organization? And if you're not able to say 100%, they may not support you, because that's a real indicator to them of effectiveness of the organizational oversight of the organization. Third, you need to ask your friends and colleagues to contribute. And so maybe that's getting them to buy a raffle ticket, or maybe it's asking them to just write a check to the Child Advocacy Center. But that's a role for board members to contribute. And so there may be different ways that your CAC has designed to make that easy for you. Maybe they have a letter that you can send to 10 of your friends and family. But there are ways that you can be successful in doing that. And it's something that you need to be willing to do. And then finally, you need to provide staff with potential corporate and civic and private contacts. So if you're a member of the Rotary, you need to say to your director, hey, I'd love to set up a time for you to come and talk to Rotary. And we all have those contacts in our community. It may be our church, it may be our business, but it is the role to make those connections, because you are the eyes and ears of the CAC in the community, and you are supposed to be laying those foundations for relationship building for the CAC. Fifth, it is the role of the board to ensure effective fiscal management. First and foremost, every Child Advocacy Center should be operating off an annual operating budget. I am very concerned if I ever hear that a Child Advocacy Center doesn't have a budget, or they don't know what a budget is. All of your Child Advocacy Centers should have an annual operating budget that should be approved by the Board of Directors. And this should be a document that you're regularly monitoring. You don't want to just see it at the one meeting per year where you approve the budget and then just forget about it. You need to see percentages year to date of how you're spending on your budget. And unless you're seeing that, there's no way for you to monitor adherence to the budget. The budget is really the way to make the mission happen for the Child Advocacy Center. And so if you see something that's really off in the budget, you need to be asking those critical questions about, why is this off? Do we need a budget adjustment? Which I think is another point on here. We do sometimes need to make changes to the budget and amendments, but it's a role of the board to really monitor that adherence. We need to understand and review financial reports, and so many times that would be a budget with a year-to-date spending and a percentage of year-to-date spending. It would also be a balance sheet so that you see how much money you have at the bank and do your assets outweigh your liabilities. And so those are the types of things that you need to see and review. And I understand that many people don't come with that expertise, so ask your director or ask a CPA on your board, can you talk us through this so that we can really understand what it is that we're after here? It's the board's role to approve sound financial management policies and monitor compliance, and to ensure that an annual independent audit is conducted and diligently review findings. This should happen on an annual basis. It's very critical because we need to find out if there are things that are potential liabilities for the organization, that they're being identified early and being addressed. The sixth role and responsibility for a board is to minimize risk. This starts out with really researching and having an understanding of what are your insurance and risk management needs, asking the types of questions. Think of every potential scenario. What happens if a client sues us? What happens if a client's name gets released? What happens if someone invades our computer because we don't have proper security? And so those are the types of things that really are the board's role, to really research and understand those risk needs. You need to obtain the proper kinds and levels of insurance, which is very related to the first one, and then establish operational policies designed to reduce the likelihood that accidents happen on negligent actions. So we need to make sure that we know what our PR policies look like, so that if we do need to fire someone, that we have a set of guidelines that we're following to reduce our risk. We need to monitor compliance with all risk management policies. So that shouldn't be, again, just the document that you approve back in 2007 and never again revisit. You need to be monitoring compliance with those policies. And then adopt and implement a crisis management plan. You need to have a plan for if something happens, how are we going to proceed? And I will say at this point that West Virginia CAN has some great resources on how to adopt that plan. We have a good template that you can follow, so it's very easy to do, but it's important so that you're prepared in the event that something does happen. And then finally, proactively develop a staff succession plan. So what happens if your executive director tomorrow gets hit by a bus? Do we know where these documents are? Do we know how to get in touch with our grantors? And then how are we going to meet the needs in the meantime while there's an illness, while that executive director needs to be out of the office? Again, West Virginia CAN has a succession plan that is templated for CACs, and we'd be more than happy to share that with you. Number 7, it is the board's role to enhance and promote the public image. On the last video, we talked about this. It is a challenge for many of our child advocacy centers to say, no, we're not CASA, we're not Child Protective Services, this is what we do. And really, the board can play a critical role in changing that in the community and making sure that people do know what the Child Advocacy Center does. Every board should oversee the development and implementation of an annual marketing and PR strategy. That would include annual reports, newsletters, fact sheets, press releases, media purchases, all those things that go into your PR strategy. The board needs to identify current and future needs of the organization. So, okay, we don't have the money to do a PR campaign this year that includes a media purchase, but we think that's so critical that we're going to work toward doing that next year. To provide comprehensive orientation for new board members and ongoing training for all board members, I think many times whenever someone is brought on in the middle of someone's term to fill a vacancy, we just forget about orienting them. That's where some of this starts to fall apart. If you don't have someone, if you don't provide them with the resources they need to be able to know what their role is and to succeed, then you're going to see negative effects from that. So you should have a comprehensive orientation for all of your new board members whenever they come into term. You need to match board member resources and strengths with appropriate roles and activities. So you may have someone who really specializes in public relations. You want to make sure that they're on that committee so that they can really help advance the PR strategy of the organization. You may have someone who is a CPA, so they need to be on the financial management committee of the board. And you will have so much more success if you're really able to identify those strengths and match them with the right roles and activities, because having the appropriate people in the appropriate roles will help you succeed. Number 8, ensure a healthy relationship between the board and lead staff. It is the board's role whenever you're hiring the executive director of the organization to have a thorough search, to schedule and conduct interviews, to select the best candidate, and provide a comprehensive orientation for that individual. We have seen executive director transitions go very well, and we've seen them go very badly. And I think that unless you really meet all these different points, you may have some challenges in your transition. We're at a point in the movement where we're seeing a lot of outgoing, founding executive directors that have been very successful in their child advocacy centers. And it's not easy to come in on the heels of that. Providing a comprehensive orientation is one piece that really helps enhance that and get them on the ground solidly and get them in the right direction with proper supports. But also, there are many things to consider when you're hiring an executive director. West Virginia CAN has a great resource that I always love to tell boards about that is specific to hiring a new executive director. There are many considerations when hiring a CAC director. You really have to have a certain skill set, and so we are really happy to consult with you when you're in this phase of your organizational life. It's important to maintain meaningful and clear job descriptions that outline responsibilities. This is true for the staff. It's true for the board. The board should have an expectation of members that indicates their willingness to serve on the board. It should be very clear to every board member what they're getting into so that no one is confused or disappointed. And again, it's really important to provide ongoing support and constructive feedback. It is the role of the board to evaluate the executive director on an annual basis. And I know that that's hard for board members to remember, but it's so critically important because without that ongoing constructive feedback, it's really setting down a path for disaster because there isn't that ongoing communication between the two entities. Again, we want to ID the roles and responsibilities of the board versus the staff and establish clear boundaries between the two. We have a handout that relates to this on our website, which is listed here. And also, you need to understand the organizational chart. Who supervises whom in the organization, and where is the role that the board has to play? And then finally, we would need to conduct regularly scheduled interactive performance reviews. And that's true both for what I just stated about the executive director and the board, but to make sure that the executive director is conducting those regularly with staff. And that needs to happen minimally on an annual basis and maybe at most 6 times a year. But there needs to be a concrete, structured time for performance reviews. Number 9, the board should engage in strategic planning. It's not appropriate for a CAC to just be operating and floundering without a plan. It really is important for them to set the priority focus areas and broad goals for the CAC, and then to conduct timely annual planning sessions to determine the relevant activities supporting the broad goals. So this is something that should be revisited on an annual basis. So you may have a 2 or 3 year strategic plan in place, but things change, and so we really need to come up with a plan every year to have that strategic plan not be something that just sits on a shelf, but something that is a real live document that you're working off of. You need to ensure the implementation of the structure and strategies designated to meet the goals. So that means, how are we going to take this piece of paper and really move it to action? A lot of times that relates to, again, the committee structure. So maybe this specific goal of the organization is referred to the PR committee. Maybe this specific goal is referred to the executive committee. But there needs to be an implementation plan that really fits into your organizational structure and makes sense so that you can ensure that things are continuing to move forward. And then monitor progress routinely and adjust as needed. And finally, we need to celebrate accomplishments. I think that this is something that we just don't do enough. CACs are doing incredible work in West Virginia, and unless you take that moment to really step back and say, wow, look at how many kids we served this year, or wow, look at how great that fundraising event went, you can get bogged down. And so I just encourage you to find a way to make that happen and make it meaningful. Maybe you all go out to dinner one night and celebrate the successful fundraiser that you just had. Or maybe you have a special time at the board meeting where you honor one another in a certain way. Just find those meaningful ways to take a step back, take a breath, and recognize what it is that you've done. Some final thoughts. It's important to routinely and proactively revisit the roles and responsibilities with board members. Many times we just forget what it is that we're supposed to be doing, and it's no fault of anyone, which is why we need to revisit the roles. Secondly, we need to address issues quickly when boundaries are blurred or responsibilities are not fulfilled. So if someone's not coming to the board meetings, maybe we just need to revisit that and say, remember, you agreed that you would attend 75% of meetings. And is that something that you're still able to do at this time? Or is it something that maybe you need to take some time off the board? And that's okay. Again, fully utilize the entire board and provide opportunities for fulfilling roles. So this is an opportunity for success. If you fully utilize the entire board and say, oh, maybe Sean wasn't at the last meeting. Why is that? Is that because he's not really being valued in his role as an attorney? Do we need to find ways for him to be, employing his skills to help advance the organization? And so looking for those opportunities on a regular basis where everyone can take part is a way to really effectively engage the board. And then finally, these are volunteers. As a board member, you're doing this out of the goodness of your heart and because you really care about and believe in the mission of the CAC. It's important for us to understand that we're all here as volunteers and to respect that status. Again, we're here to help you if you have any questions or needs. There are many things that I mentioned during the video that could be useful to you at different times in the life of the organization. Our contact information is listed, and please never hesitate to reach out. And thanks again for what you do. It really makes a difference.